It's now time for our scripture lesson. Time check. It's 10:07 and the middle of July. Do you know where your good intentions are? As humans, we tend to be creatures of habit. We also tend to notice and depend on cycles and milestones to mark our lives. Though we hear time and again that time and space are just illusions that we experience in the physical world, we often turn to them to gauge our progress in this life. And as we pass into the second half of the year, it's in that context that my thoughts are taken back to the beginning of the year, a time when we're encouraged to set our intentions for the coming months and express determination to do things differently than we have in the past. More often than not, we quickly forget about these goals and return to our comfort zone of habit, doing the same old things the same old way, even if they don't serve our needs as very well. This is the basis of our discussion today, inspired by 1 Kings chapter 16, verses 21 and 22, which read, "Then the people of Israel were split into two factions. Half supported Tibni, the son of Ginath, for king, and the other half supported Omri. But Omri's followers proved stronger than those of Tibni. So Tibni died, and Omri became king." And so it reads. Before we go into our lesson, let's talk about this passage a little bit. As humans, we have an innate curiosity about where we come from, our history. The Bible provides a lot of that background in order to explain the relationships among many of the characters in the stories. Pages and pages of what I call the begats. There's an entire chapter in the book of Genesis dedicated to just listing the many descendants of Esau, the grandson of Abraham. There are almost 100 other verses just in the Old Testament laying out the passage of generations. The book of Matthew in the New Testament begins with a listing of the 42 generations leading from Abraham to Jesus, so that you know that the stories and figures of the Old and New Testaments are connected by more than just pages. The two books of Kings do the same thing, but as the title indicates, they detail the lineage of the kings of Israel and Judah, starting with the passing of King David and ending with the release of Jehoiakim, the last king of Judah, some 400 years later. It's more than just a list. The progression of leadership paints a picture of how the energy and consciousness of society changed over centuries. And like the begats, it also helps the readers understand how people in the stories are connected to each other and to us. Now, reading a genealogy is probably not the most interesting or productive way to spend one's time. Fortunately, Kings tell stories along the way to make it more interesting. And that's where our lesson comes from today. I selected it because it illustrates the conflicting energies of the two people vying to be king, and how those energies work with each other and where it takes us in our own consciousness. In the story, we have two men with an opportunity to replace King Zimri, who had reigned for an incredibly long period of 7 days, dying after he burned the palace down with himself inside. The people of Israel are divided. One faction favors Tibni, the son of Ginath. The other faction favors Omri, who had been appointed general for the previous king who had just died. Of course, everyone wants their way, but only one man can be king. The faction supporting Tibni makes him king, but Omri's people are pretty influential. Tibni dies, and Omri ultimately becomes king. There's not much detail about how all of this happened, but that's what the book says. Omri went on to rule for 12 years, so we assume his reign was more successful. But was it? And that's where our lesson comes in. Metaphysical philosophy reminds us that the stories of the Bible are stories about us and the unfoldment of our consciousness, both individually and humanity as a whole. So what could these 3 sentences about Tibni and Omri possibly teach us about ourselves? Well, sit tight and it will be revealed. Metaphysically, each person in the Bible represents an aspect of our consciousness. From Genesis to Revelation, the tales of hundreds of people are presented as lessons about us, every last one of them. According to the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, the Hebrew name Tibni means structure or pattern. Metaphysically, Tibni represents our inner knowing of divine truth, that inner pattern or structure of God, or I am consciousness that expresses within us. Tibni is the son of Ginath. Ginath is our thoughts of abundant sustenance and safety as we prevail over our challenges. The fruits of these thoughts, Tibni, are endowed with spiritual insight and knowledge that guide us on our journey and of understanding. But wait, Tibni died, right? How does our spiritual insight die? Well, in this story, our thoughts that bear insight are not always strong enough to carry us through and are overcome by Omri. The Hebrew name Omri means sheath, like a sleeve. Think of a covering that remains outside of whatever is in it. Symbolically, Omri represents our openness to receiving divine guidance and trusting in the abundance and source of God. These thoughts, though, are not necessarily based in truth, but outside of it, like a sheath. It's our tendency to depend on earthly guidance and ideas outside of us or outside of the sleeve, rather than depending on our inner knowing of God. As Charles Fillmore put it, the thoughts of the outer world become the basis of action, and life becomes kind of a fool's paradise. Of course, being the sovereign ruler of a nation requires some level of ego, which all of the kings represent in different ways. The Tibni in us trusts in divine inspiration of truth. We do our best to follow this guidance and use the wisdom it bears wisely. But the Omri in us is often distracted by earthly ideas and news channels that divert our attention from things to things that seem true, but don't necessarily serve our highest good. So here we have two candidates. One strives to connect in a genuine way and do what he can to help the people that he's leading. The other is focused on earthly ideas and what he can gain from them. The energy of earthly ideas has wider appeal, so the spiritual way dies, and the earthly appeal of success and wealth becomes king. Like I said earlier, the stories represent us individually and also humanity in general. As I think about it, the story sounds an awful lot like aspects of our country today, but we'll focus on the individual for now. When we make our New Year's resolutions or make any choice to better ourselves, we're doing so with genuine intent. We're focused on what serves our highest good and do what we can to make improvements in the way we think and the way we behave and the way we live our life. Of course, that's just a generalization, but that's the gist of the exercise. In this energy, we are Tibni. The guidance of our experience and our spirit tells us what we need to do, and we use the new year as a milestone to renew our focus on what's right for us. But over time, we get distracted by everyday life. The throngs that supported Omri are these distractions: our jobs, families, lattes, and other things of life that demand our attention. Add to that the things we desire: vacations, money, recognition, or dessert, that leave us little time to focus on growth and unfoldment. Slowly, and sometimes not so slowly, our Tibni intentions end up on a back burner, or on a shelf in the back of the kitchen cabinet, or buried in a dusty box in the attic, long forgotten. And they quietly die, to be succeeded by Omri, the earthly ideas and responsibilities that demand so much of our time. It's a battle between spirit and survival, between peace and turmoil, between understanding and comfort. For me, the pandemic lockdown was Tibni's kingdom for me. I didn't have much else to do, so I started walking a lot and eating in a more healthy way determined to lose the pounds that had accumulated over too many years and that were accumulating even faster now that I was sitting at home with nothing to do and nowhere to go. My well-being became a priority over comfort and other earthly distractions. I walked, and then I walked, and I walked some more, sometimes 20 or 25 miles or more in a week. I cut out sugar and bread. I made a point to eat more vegetables and fiber and less junk. And I lost weight. I felt better. My knees stopped hurting for the first time in years. I surprised myself by sticking to it. And the more I did it, the easier it became to avoid the bad habits I was learning to overcome. And I stuck with it a lot longer than I ever had before. Tibney's reign for me lasted a good long time. But then life happened. As stay-at-home restrictions were lifted and old responsibilities and needs returned to the forefront, I found that I didn't have as much time to focus on my new routine. There was so much more that needed to be done. Last year, I started getting a little lazy. It was easier to eat what was handy than to put thought into what entered my mouth. There was less time to go walking because we had our old center to move out of and a new center to get ready. Then wintertime came and it just seemed like too much trouble. The old habits started coming back. Tibni was dying and Omri rose to power and the pounds started creeping back. So what did I do? I thought about what had changed. I remembered how important my Tibni experience had been and found ways to make room for it. It isn't practical for me to walk all day anymore, but I do my best to go for a long walk at least 2 days a week, which isn't always possible. I also decided that if there isn't time to walk, I need to do something else to replace it, like working in the yard or doing strength exercises with weights or bags of mulch or whatever it takes. The old Tibni is dead and gone, but I'm sure not going to let Omri be in charge. This is my time, and as I maintain my focus on my goals, the memory of my Tibni energy keeps me inspired. The pounds are starting to subside again. I'm spending less time stuffing food in my face just because it's sitting nearby. And when I'm more mindful about what I do, I'm rewarded for my good behavior. So much for my challenges. Another way of looking at Tibni and Omri comes from cartoons and old movies. Tibni is like that angel on one shoulder telling you what's best for you. Omri is the less than angelic figure on the other shoulder telling you what you'd rather be doing. Which one is right and which one is wrong? More importantly, which one gets its way? That is the dilemma, and that is what the story of Tibni and Omri is all about. Of course, I'm sure none of you has ever had a situation where your passions took reign over your sensibilities, right? So what do we do with this awareness once we have it? It's July now. Half of the year is gone. Maybe you've been good and stuck with your resolutions. Maybe you tossed them aside after only a few days. Maybe you've given up on making resolutions entirely. But as I often say, you don't need resolutions, just resolution, determination that will inspire you to make your world a better place, not only for you, but for those around you. That's why we're having this little time check. I wouldn't expect you to make Independence Day resolutions or anything like that. But since half the year has gone by, it might be a good time to take stock in what's going on in your consciousness and in your life, and make a plan to find G-O-D, good, orderly direction in whatever you do. Life isn't perfect, and neither are we. We're always going to have those little impish thoughts in our head telling us to go ahead and live it up, while the little angelic voices are reminding us what trouble we're going to get into if we do. That's just the way our brain works. It's a constant battle, and it's probably why the books of Kings give us 47 chapters of stories about triumphs and failures that remind us of the cycles of achievements and challenges in our lives. You are a spiritual being, and you are also human, with all of the frailties that come with it. You don't need to be overwhelmed by impossible goals. You don't have to change the world. Sometimes the most powerful change is initiated by tiny gestures. Keep your eye on the divine. Let spirit be your guide and inspiration at all times, like Tibni. And set aside earthly temptations that can kill your aspirations, like Omri. Give yourself a little room to fail, and give yourself even more room to succeed. And let yourself learn from all of those experiences. More importantly, give yourself a goal to work toward, or a series of little goals, whatever you think you can handle and keep in power. And let your inner guidance tell you where to take it all. You'll be surprised how your life changes. Namaste.